I'm Ian Hanomansing live at the Vancouver Area Control Centre. This is the first time NAV Canada has allowed a live telecast from a facility like this, and so we're bringing you an unprecedented look inside Canada's air traffic control system. We also have the biggest news stories of the evening, and for that, let's go back to our newsroom. Here's Sarah Galashan. Sarah?
Thanks, Ian. We got more on those stories coming up in about 10 minutes from now. But for now, let's go back to Ian, live at the Air Control Centre in Surrey, BC.
All right, thank you, Sarah. You know, when you think air traffic control, you probably don't think of a scene like this. We're not in a tower. We're not near an airport. You can't just look out a window and see planes taking off and landing. But this is, as you said, an area control center, one of 7 across the country. This one is about 35 kilometers southeast of downtown Vancouver on a side street in Surrey. Here, air traffic controllers are responsible for about 460,000 flights a year across British Columbia and into the Pacific. But if you weren't looking for it, you'd probably drive right by. In amongst the big box stores and self-storage, the building looks more like a government office than an air traffic control center. So here we are with a chance to show you the heart of the air traffic control system. I have to tell you, it's the 4th time I've been here over the last few weeks, and I still find it absolutely fascinating. Especially fascinating when you think that some of the biggest news stories of the past few months have involved aviation and air traffic control, especially the mystery of MH370, a story that broke while this program was on the air. A jet carrying more than 200 people has disappeared. Air traffic controllers lost contact with one of its planes flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing.
Flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
In the days and weeks that followed, confusion and questions about what the radar saw and how flights are tracked over open ocean.
We may have to be looking at a GPS capability that cannot be turned off, because this is absolutely unacceptable for us to have a 777 with 239 souls on board literally vanish.
The search continues for any trace of the jetliner. And in July, another tragic air disaster. 116 people, including 5 Canadians, killed when an Air Algérie flight crashed into the desert in Mali. It's believed weather may have been a factor.
We know that the crew reported to the air traffic controllers that they were making that turn to avoid thunderstorms in the area.
But 3 months later, investigators still aren't sure what brought the jet down.
601, just stop your heading. Stop your turn right there, sir. United 601, stop your turn. Stop your climb and stop your turn for United 601.
You might remember this story from May. Air traffic controllers in Houston narrowly averting disaster in the sky. 2 planes, one bound for Vancouver, crossed into the same flight path.
And when you think about planes that are traveling at takeoff speed, really they were a matter of seconds away from a possible impact.
It's not just crises in the sky. From the unexpected.
A fire at the FAA center that controls radar for flights at Midway and O'Hare airports brought air traffic to a halt.
To plain old Canadian winter.
Hundreds of flights were canceled this morning, a complete shutdown at Canada's largest airport.
Getting flights in the air safely and on time is something some of us take for granted every time we get ready to take off. So just after 7 o'clock here in Surrey on Canada's west coast, after 10 o'clock Eastern time, let's check in with Brent Bell, a long-time air traffic controller, now a supervisor here at NAV Canada. This computer screen helps us see live what's happening with air traffic across North America. And right now, at this time of night, we're looking at a flow of planes heading from North America through NAVCAN-controlled airspace to Europe.
That's right, Ian. The aircraft are coming up through North America, through the Gander oceanic airspace, and on their way to England for a morning arrival. So it's a busy time of night for our counterparts in Gander Centre.
Yeah, when we talked a little bit earlier on this evening, I think there was something like 5,000 planes in the sky in Canada and the United States. Right now it's down to 3,400. And in terms of delays or notices to airmen, as it's described, anything of interest going on across Canada right now?
It really has been a routine day today, Ian. Things have gone exactly how we like them to go.
And yet every time I fly to Calgary, it seems there's a delay of an hour or two, but nothing like that happening right now.
Nothing right now. Everything is going well in Calgary as well today.
Okay, well, you know what? That's a good sign, and I'm sure those of you who are flying are enjoying that. Brent will check in with you a little bit later on in the hour. I should point out safety, of course, is the priority here when it comes to air traffic control, and so we're being very careful to make sure we don't do anything that's going to interrupt any of the people who, as we speak, are guiding planes across airspace in this center. It's in British Columbia. But we still wanted to give you an up-close look at what's happening at these workstations on these computer screens. So we had a chance to plug in and look over the shoulder of a veteran air traffic controller, Kirk Strachan.
Departure, WestJet 602, we're through 1100 for 7000, Georgia 5.
WestJet 602, departure rate identified, climb and maintain 12,000.
He seems so casual, it's easy to forget what those numbers and letters on the screen represent. Commercial aircraft filled with people that have just taken off from Vancouver International Airport.
Climb and date, what? Hold the portraits for me. I don't see him. I don't see him. Turn him. Turn him left. I don't even see his climb. Where is he? Turn him.
For most of us who have only seen the Hollywood version of air traffic control, there are a couple of things that may come as a surprise. One is the technology. Some controllers still use strips of paper to keep track of flights, but at Strachan's workstation, it's been replaced by, what else? A computer monitor. So it's paperless, and it would appear stress-free.
Air Canada 214, turn left heading 070.
Left 070, Canada 214.
Roger.
And yet few jobs have as much riding on every moment, every decision. Even if our camera weren't here, all of this is recorded in case something goes wrong. When people ask you about the stress, how do you describe it to them?
I mean, I guess I say I don't find it stressful. I mean, I think it is stressful, but I think we just hire the people that can manage stress and being able to deal with the job. I think the training that we go through is very stressful, and I think it's a great avenue to identify who can manage stress and who can't.
WestJet 602, turn left heading 070.
070, WestJet 602.
Roger.
Departure to Jet 67, 1,500 for 6,000.
Jazz 67, departure rate identified, climb maintain 4,000.
Climb maintain 4,000, Jazz 67.
Your speed is your discretion.
When there are tough spots, like when there's an aircraft in distress or they have a medical issue on board, I mean, although we have a lot of different personalities in here and they don't always meld, whenever there's a challenging situation, it's amazing how we come together. And we may part the skies to get an aircraft in distress, and we want to get them on the ground as quickly as possible. And yeah, that's very satisfying.
You know, when I look at this room right now, it seems very casual. Like you look at these guys here and they're chatting. I mean, they're doing their jobs, but it's casual. How does it change at that moment when, let's say, there's somebody in distress on a plane and you have to get them down?
It's like a light switch. Yeah, we can be very lighthearted, and there's something that happens something goes awry where an aircraft might blow through an altitude or something like that, or yeah, an aircraft in distress, or when we get busy. All of a sudden, it's just everybody gets focused on the job, and you can hear a pin drop.
And Kirk says when that happens, even for a visitor, when you walk in this room, you can instantly tell something is going on. NAV Canada has been in existence for 18 years. It is a privately run, not-for-profit organization that controls Canadian airspace. And as I mentioned, this area control center is one of 7 across Canada. There are centers like this one at airports in some major centers, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, but also in Moncton and Gander. Each is responsible for the planes flying in their designated region. In all, NAV Canada is responsible for a huge amount of airspace, 18 million square kilometers, stretching from just off the west coast of Vancouver Island, up north, nearly reaching Greenland, and well into the Atlantic Ocean. For many of us, it was only when MH370 vanished that we realized that there are huge parts of the world where the only way controllers know where a plane is when the pilot radios in. It's out of the range of ground-based radar, but that may be changing. NAV Canada is a partner in a venture called Arion, and that in turn is going to use satellites from a company that theoretically will keep planes in contact with controllers everywhere in the world. I talked to NAV Canada's Ron Singer about the new plan.
There's a constellation of 66 low Earth orbiting satellites where we will put these receiving units on. So they will cover the entire globe. So from now on, or starting in 2017, air traffic controllers will be able to see the aircraft where they are virtually all over the world, the northern tips, remote regions, including the oceans. So that's a huge change for air traffic controllers.
I guess the wild card is, for some reason, the transponder on MH370 shut down, either because there was some kind of failure or somebody actually shut it down. There's no telling whether that'll happen in the future, even with this system.
Well, this system will not correct that situation. That will have to be an airline and aircraft manufacturer's decision whether they come up with a tamper-proof transponder. So I think that's a situation that we'll be talking about for sure. The other thing that we will be offering, even to air traffic control services that don't necessarily subscribe to the Ariane system, is we will have the information for search and rescue operations. We will keep the data if in case of a situation like MH370, which again is a very rare situation, but that'll give additional information for rescue operations and searching and tracking to find the last position of the airplane before it went down.
You have competitors?
There are some other systems out there, yes. Well, we do, but our system with the tagging on the Iridium low Earth orbiting satellites, our second generation, which the first launch will be in 2015, gives the widest coverage, pole to pole, ocean to ocean.
12 minutes after 7 o'clock as we look at YVR, Vancouver International Airport, where my colleague Johanna Wagstaff spent some time in the tower.
Ian, I know everyone's working hard out there in Surrey, but here at the NAV Canada Control Tower at YVR, we've got a view. I'll take you through the best seats in the house coming up. But first, Sarah Glashan with the day's top stories.
Now let's go back to Ian, who is live at the Vancouver Area Control Center in Surrey, BC.
Thanks, Sarah. I've had the privilege of speaking to a handful of air traffic controllers while I've been here. Behind me right now working is Anne Breen. She's dealing with traffic that's heading to and from the Abbotsford Airport, not too far from Surrey, and also Bellingham in Washington State. She is one of the controllers I spoke to, and you'll hear from them coming up as they tell us about their unforgettable moments.
September 11th. There was no preparation for it. It was intense.
We all remember that day, the chaos and uncertainty. So what was it like to be an air traffic controller as planes across North America were grounded? That's coming up. And we're heading to the control tower at YVR. Johanna Wagstaff will show us what may just be the best seat at Vancouver International. Stay with us as we continue live.
Come fly with me, let's fly away. If you can use
It is about 7:24 here on the West Coast, and you're looking at a shot of YVR just south of Vancouver, the second busiest airport in the country, with air traffic controllers keeping track of all those takeoffs and landings.
Come fly.
And they've got a busy job. Last year, there were 263,000 flights arriving and departing from Vancouver Airport. Air traffic controllers here are dealing with 53 airlines from around the world. In all, the controllers are responsible for the safety of nearly 18 million passengers who fly through YVR every year.
Sorry,
I was mentioning earlier, when you think air traffic control, you probably don't think of a room like this, but rather picture that tower at an airport with windows where you can actually see planes taking off and landing. And that's where my colleague Johanna Wagstaff, you know she's a meteorologist, she's also a recreational pilot, and she got to spend some of her day there.
Ian, I'm here at the NAV Canada Control Tower at YVR, and I've got to say, it is really cool. Now, normally at 19 stories high, you'd be able to see for miles out towards the North Shore, all the way down the Sunshine Coast, and over towards Nanaimo. But right now, it's completely socked in with fog, just one of the many challenges that Vancouver often has to deal with. So what is the NAV Canada Control Tower? How is it different here than where you are in Surrey, Ian? Well, here, the air traffic controllers are responsible for everything below 2,500 feet and in roughly a 10 nautical mile radius. That's the control zone. Outside of that zone, it gets passed off to Surrey. Tell me about the teamwork here in the tower.
The teamwork here is amazing. We've got 41 air traffic controllers, some of the best in the world, and we work together as a team day in and day out. We have fun, we laugh a lot, we work very hard to safely get the job done, and at the end of the day, it's great job satisfaction. We go home and we've just had a great day with some terrific people and moved some airplanes and got thousands of people where they needed to be.
What are the challenges of a job like this?
Well, today is a perfect example. Weather is is one of our challenges. We can see the fog's coming in, so as airport controllers here at YVR, a lot of what we do is visual. We're visually separating aircraft, so when the weather comes in like this, it makes it challenging. We've got to use our equipment, our ground radar, to be able to see aircraft in these types of conditions. Especially on a day like today, where normally we could have our float planes, everybody's seeing each other, and all the helicopters, everybody's able to sight each other from a long ways away. On a day like today's, aircraft have to fly lower to get underneath the weather. So there's different challenges with that. They can't maybe necessarily do the altitudes that they would normally do or the headings that they would normally do. So it's not necessarily harder, it's just a little bit more interesting.
Well, it's not just the weather that makes YVR so unique. NAV Canada Air Traffic Control Tower here in Vancouver also has the added challenge of controlling all of the float planes and the helicopters just off to the south. They're also all within the control zone. Add to that the challenge of the wildlife. Last time we were here, Ian, there was a coyote on the runway they had to deal with, flying through the mountains, the fog that's rolled in. It seems like there's never a dull moment here at the NAV Canada Control Tower at YVR, even though everyone seems very calm.
Up until 10 years ago, this facility was located just a short walk from the YVR tower, but a major earthquake in Seattle, which is just about a 3-hour drive from here, prompted a change.
Have a huge earthquake going on. The tower is collapsing. I say again, the tower is falling apart. Hang on, everybody.
The shaking caused all the glass on the tower to break and 6 of the 8 support beams to collapse. No one was hurt, and amazingly, controllers continued to land planes for 10 minutes after the quake. So NAV Canada took notice, and given the fact that Vancouver is in an earthquake zone, they decided to move this area control center a little further inland. So how would a quake affect YVR and the control tower there? Well, you know, Johanna Wagstaff is also a seismologist, so she took a look at that.
Well, Ian, this tower is actually built to withstand a 7.2 magnitude earthquake, but Richmond, what the airport is built on, has the added factor of sitting on a delta, basically we're a meter below sea level. Now, there's an extensive network of dikes to protect the city and the airport from flooding, but in a worst case scenario, if some of those dikes were to rupture and all of that water would move in underground, it could temporarily turn the soil into a fluid, what we call liquefaction, and buildings and structures would be unable to stay upright. But the tower is actually specially built. The foundation is reinforced, so if that flooding and liquefaction were to happen, a series of pumps would help to clear out the water. Basically, this tower is built like a fortress. But in a worst case scenario, in any scenario where evacuation would have to happen, control would be transferred over to the controllers in Surrey. So nice to know there is a contingency plan in place.
Johanna Wagstaff at YVR. So just think about the things that might happen while a controller is on his or her ship. An earthquake, obviously, could have smoke in the cockpit, a medical emergency on board, or what about a pilot who just won't listen?
Sure enough, I was watching and he starts to make a left-hand turn when he's not supposed to.
Right into the path of another plane. Just one of the stressful situations controllers can deal with. We'll hear from 3 air traffic controllers about the moment they'll never forget and how they manage the pressure. You're looking live at the Vancouver Area Control Center. There's Kirk Strachan, busy at work. We've been talking a lot this hour, but just how calm and organized all of this seems. You'd never guess these air traffic controllers are directing planes filled with hundreds of passengers. Very different from the Hollywood version.
Continental 2478, descend to 3000.
2478.
Delta 532, make a hard left turn heading 090. Too steep a turn.
I'm going to kiss my own tail on that one, my friend.
Delta, make the turn or I'll spin you. You'll land nice and easy sometime before Christmas.
So I've learned in real life, air traffic controllers don't dwell on those close calls, at least not when they're talking to journalists. But if you work here long enough, chances are you're going to deal with an emergency. And I spoke to 3 air traffic controllers and asked them what moment for them was the most memorable.
September 11th. I think I'm the only one of the panel that was here when that happened, but there was no preparation for it. It was intense. There was just a lot needed to be done with not a lot of information. And what was really cool to see was everybody pitch in, and people come into work early, people sitting for longer periods of time than they were used to, a lot more talking, a lot more coordination, but you knew you were part of something bigger. So you just got in there and you did it.
I saw a manual around the corner, and it has a list of potential emergencies. And as I looked through the headings, they all made sense to me. There was no procedure for what happened on September 11th.
Well, I mean, that's unprecedented period. You just do what you have to do. And sometimes you kind of make stuff up on the fly, not in terms of routings or procedures or stuff like that, but in terms of communication and how you're going to do that. You just do the best you can under the circumstances.
And is there anything particular from that day, from a conversation you had or something you did that sticks in your mind?
I think when you were in the heart of it and things were ongoing, you didn't focus on what was happening, you just did your job. It was once all the planes got on the ground and we were sitting there after the fact and there was no plane on any scope in the 25 that were in the building, that you would process it and go, wow, what did we just live through? Like, what was that? That was the moment afterwards where it was just all kind of hit home.
This is the one thing I always think back to, is the one time that there was an aircraft that took off from Kelowna, and he was supposed to be going to the United States, which is south. But the procedure in Kelowna is when you take off, you're supposed to take off, and then you're supposed to turn right, and then you're supposed to keep flying and just keep going until air traffic control tells you what to do otherwise. And it just so happened that there was another plane that was flying along, and I thought, now if he doesn't know that he's supposed to wait until he gets further instructions from us, then he might try and just go to where he was going, which would, now instead of doing this, they're doing this. And so I kind of watched it, and I waited, and everything was going fine, but then sure enough, I was watching, and he starts to make a left-hand turn when he's not supposed to. And I said, you're not supposed to do that, essentially, in polite terms. And he said, oh, sorry about that. And he turned back the way he was going, and it was fine, and nothing happened. But if I were to sort of tell the story to my mom, and be like, oh, yeah, this plane, he started flying all over the place, and he almost crashed in this other plane, and she might think it was really crazy. But the reality of the situation is that although it could have been very bad, it could have been disastrous, it was something, that's what we do on a regular basis. We watch, we make sure, and when something's going wrong, we take steps to correct the problem, and then it's not a problem anymore. And that's stressful, I think, for some people when they think to themselves, they get really detailed in their minds, and they think to themselves, well, there could be 20 people on that plane, there could be 300 people on that plane, that would be 320 dead people if I didn't do something about it. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if that gives you chills or makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, do not apply for this job. This is not the job for you.
There is something to be said, being an ex-pilot. I think that I find that having been on the other side of the microphone, and in those scenarios where it's either smoke in the cockpit or you give, struck by lightning, hit a bird on the runway, all those types of situations, having some insight into what's going on the other side of the microphone, I know that as stressful as it might seem for me at that moment in time, it is exponentially more stressful for the person on the other side of the mic. And so I think what I find stressful about that scenario is that I want to make sure that I can do everything I can with the tools that are made available to me by Nav Canada to help out the pilot on the other side of the mic.
Just after 7:37 here on the West Coast, 10:37 Eastern. Brent Bell checking in with him again, longtime air traffic controller, now a supervisor at Nav Canada, and we have news to report. This is the most routine night in the history of aviation in Canada, this huge country, all the towers and area control centers you deal with, and how many significant delays and problems do you have to report for us?
None.
Like, I asked you to look and double check and not a single thing. Is that typical for this time of year, or is this an unusually routine, or not even routine, but smooth night?
Well, it's been a smooth night. We haven't had any weather around the country to interfere with our operations. It's the way we like the business to run.
Sure, absolutely. Now let's take a quick look at this. This is a real-time look at what's happening at YVR right now, where you're the manager of that control tower. And what are we seeing right here?
What we're seeing here, the blue line is indicating the departures. About 20 minutes ago, we had a big departure spike. Our notional maximum is up here at the white line. Departures are trailing off this time of night now, and then also the arrivals, as you can see, will start to taper off. So the bulk of the day is behind us now, Ian.
All right, well, that sounds very good. So if those of you watching have any loved ones or friends who are flying tonight, chances are they're going to be on time. Or if they tell you they're not on time, they're probably stopping somewhere on their way home. Everything seems to be good. Brent, we'll check in with you before the end of the hour, because one of the things I want to talk about is that air traffic controller who proposed live on the radio. It sounds like an interesting story. We're also going to find out what it takes to be an air traffic controller. It is not an easy thing to end up in one of these seats. But let's go back now to Sarah Galashan with more on today's news. Sarah?
Thanks, Ian. Still ahead, much more from the NAV Canada Area Control Centre in Surrey, BC. Ian?
Thanks, Sarah. I want to show you something that's happening right now, and it's very interesting. The person that's sitting down behind us is a trainee. He's dealing with live planes in the air. If there are any problems, the person standing next to him, his trainer, will jump in. It is a long and difficult process. Coming up, we'll find out what it takes in Canada to become an air traffic controller. Stay with us. We're looking live at one of the busiest airports in the country, Vancouver International, and focusing on the people whose job it is to guide you safely in the skies. It has been interesting asking people here how they ended up getting into this business. There are a lot of people hired by NAV Canada in the coming year, probably about 200 air traffic controllers, but as I was mentioning before the break, it can be a tough process. I talked to NAV Canada's Greg Dansereau about what it takes.
People need to be able to think three-dimensionally, and not everyone has that type of skill set. So they need to go and do the practice tests, fill out the exams, and they're screened that way. So we're also looking for people who are interested in aviation. We recruit people who we want to keep with the company for long-term commitments. So it helps if they have an interest in the industry.
So you mentioned the spatial ability, being interested in a career here. Obviously also being able to deal with who knows what will get thrown at them once they're sitting down dealing with flights.
Yeah, that's right. So the ability to handle things as they come to them. Now, all the people we have here are highly trained, and I would say that they're professionals. But you never know what's going to happen when you walk into this building. And we train them for different scenarios, so they're well prepared. And it's a 2-year training stream from coming in the door to being licensed. And training is ongoing once they're in the door. So we invest a lot in our employees.
So yeah, I was looking at the website. One of the things that people are told, be prepared to have to do a lot of memorization in the training. Be prepared to spend some time without getting paid. Sounds like a tough road before you even know if you have what it takes here.
And I think a lot of controllers would tell you that the most stressful part of their career was that training. Getting through the first 2 years where they had to do all the memorization and ramp themselves up to the point where they could absorb all the information and apply it. So it can be a tough period of time for people when they come on the company.
And you probably deal with people who had no idea when they were 15 or 18, 20 years old that they were going to be air traffic controllers. It's not something I hear a lot of kids saying, that's what I want to be when I grow up.
And a lot of people don't know about the job. And if we're lucky, people think about an air traffic control tower when you say ATC. Sometimes people think of us as the guy on the ground waving the airplane in with the flashlights. Yeah, not a lot of people know about places like this and the jobs that are available here. And I think these are some of the best jobs in the country.
Right now, there are about 2,000 air traffic controllers across Canada. Some work in centres like the one we're in, others in the 41 airport control towers. It's a high-pressure, well-paying job. Most area controllers make more than $100,000 a year. But as you heard from Greg, the training is very challenging. It's a mix of coursework and on-the-job training. Only about a third of trainees will make it through to become air traffic controllers. We have more to come from the Vancouver Area Control Center. Up next, we'll check in one last time with Controller Brent Bell about changing technology over his career and also a proposal over the air by an air traffic controller like none other. Stay with us. A live shot of Vancouver International Airport. Let's check in one last time with Brent Bell, who has this story we keep talking about. I'm finally going to get to hear it, of an air traffic controller at YVR, at the NavCan Tower there, who proposed to a woman who was on board one of the planes coming in. Tell me about the story.
That's correct. So the controller's working the aircraft, clears the aircraft to land, the aircraft clears the runway. The controller says to the pilot, I was going to ask my girlfriend to marry me in the air, but I chickened out.
And the pilot said, why didn't you try doing that?
The pilot talked him into it.
Yeah.
The pilot offered to connect him to the PA system of the aircraft, and the controller made a proposal on the aircraft over the aircraft PA system to his girlfriend. He got down on one knee in the cab with a ring in his hand and asked her to marry him.
And so Nav Canada pointing out that this plane was safely on the ground when all of this happened. She said
yes, and we got official confirmation from the purser through the pilot.
Now, your time as a controller and as a supervisor, how many years have you been with Nav Canada and its predecessor?
31 years.
I assume you've never heard a story like that before or since.
It's the first time.
And you were a supervisor, not on that shift, but at the YVR control tower. How do you react to that kind of story as a supervisor?
Well, it's a beautiful story, isn't it? It's the most romantic air traffic control story, I think, in the history of the business. So
That's
it's
nice.
pretty nice.
That's good, because, you know, one of the things here is that people are easygoing and very personable, but also, and you must see this from both sides of the job, both having been a controller, now being a supervisor, when it comes time to be serious, you have to be able to be dead serious. As Kirk Strachan said, it's like a switch suddenly gets turned on.
Absolutely, and the guys can be focused that way when they need to be, and Bright, and this controller who made the proposal, he's exactly that kind of individual. Found the right time, it was perfect.
Of all the things that we see around us, this array of technology, is there any particular thing that strikes you as the most dramatically different from when you walked into a control tower the first time?
Well, when I got to Vancouver Tower in 1985, we were still using radar scopes that looked very much like submarine sonars.
So you had that line going around. Wow.
The targets would fade in and out. So the radar technology is fantastic. All the digital systems we have for keeping track of the radar data and the aircraft data, it's just exceptional. It's state of the art.
But how difficult is it for people to keep up with that technology? I mean, we see it in every business, including television. You see people who are, 20, 30 years in the business. What's it like staying up to date?
Well, it's adaptive, but you get used to it over time. You get used to the change that's coming. It just becomes part of your career. And we train very, very, very hard to just maintain that level of proficiency.
And as Kirk mentioned to us earlier, every single moment here is recorded. What's on the screen, the audio, so when anyone here makes a mistake, as rare as that is, obviously that gets followed up. That's an incredible thing about this work environment.
Absolutely. Everything we do and say is recorded. We know exactly what happened. We can look it all back in the past in just a minute.
All right, Brent Bell, thank you very much for speaking to us, and thanks to all the people at Nav Canada who allowed us in this extraordinary access.